Hello, this is Greg Lawhorn, GP Lawhorn on the Logos forums, and this is the video that I talked about for a few days comparing my current MacBook Pro 16-inch with the new MacBook Air 13-inch with the M1 chip, specifically how it works with Logos Bible software and Proclaim presentation software. Let me say at the very beginning, if all you care about is that the MacBook Air M1 will run Logos and Proclaim, it does, and it does it very, very well. Logos works as it should, so does Proclaim. Let me say also at the start that I'm incredibly impressed with the MacBook Air. When I connect my Air up to my external monitor and keyboard and trackpad, I really don't get the sense that I'm using a different computer. It's not exactly the same, but it is so close that I quickly forget which computer I have hooked up. I played around with MacBook Airs in the past. I remember watching Steve Jobs almost 13 years ago pull out a computer from a manila envelope on a stage, and that was an incredibly cool moment.
Take it out here. This is the new MacBook Air.
Well, I've always seen MacBook Airs as really awesome looking machines, and it's such a cool idea, but when I actually went to the Apple Store and played around with one, I realized it was really kind of an iPad with a keyboard. It was a very basic entry-level machine. It really wasn't ready for any serious work that I do in ministry. And this was, by the way, before I used Logos. This new computer with the M1 chip is almost indistinguishable from my MacBook Pro. Here are the specifications for these two laptops. My current laptop is a MacBook Pro 16-inch 2019 model. It has a 2.4 gigahertz 8-core i9 processor, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and an AMD Radeon Pro 5500M 8 gigabyte graphic card. The MacBook Air is the $1,249 model with Apple's M1 8-core chip and 8-core GPU. I chose the $1,249 model because of the 8-core GPU. The lower model has 7. I don't know how much difference that would make. And I also wanted the 528 gigabytes of memory instead of 256. Both computers are running the current version of Mac OS Big Sur. They are also running the current versions of Logos. As you can see, Logos 9.0 SR2 and Proclaim 3.0.0.0042, which may be a little bit more specific than the system needs to be. What I did was carry out the same operations on each laptop. I used a program called Capto to record what was happening on the screen. There does appear to be a little bit of a difference in quality of the screen capture between the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. I'm not too sure why that is. I'll show you the time it took for each operation as we go, and then I'll give you a summary at the end. This is what you're going to see. I'll launch Logos on each machine. After a restart, Logos will open up to a blank screen. I'll open up my basic sermon prep layout, see how long that takes. I'll open up 3 sections in the exegetical guide, specifically word-by-word commentaries and important passages, just to kind of get a sense of how long it takes to populate those. I'll scroll through the Bible text a little bit to see how responsive scrolling is. I'll carry out a simple search with a large number of results. I'll be looking for every time God speaks in Scripture. I'll open up a sermon document, I'll create a Bible slide, and then I'll edit the slide's background and update the sermon. And then I'll open up the library and tag a large number of resources. I'm in the library frequently, and I often create collections to make my work more efficient. So I think the time it takes to retag a large number of resources should be a good comparison for what the two machines do. Two other things briefly before we get going. First, I think that we can all agree that a complete reindex of Logos can be excruciating. The initial indexing on the MacBook Air took the better part of 3 hours. I didn't bother to get a more exact time because it's not something that we really do very much at all. In my experience, the greatest heat in indexing comes at the very end. Two other brief things. First of all, I think that we can agree that a complete reindex of logos is an excruciating process. It just takes forever. It took the better part of 3 hours for the MacBook Pro to get through that. I didn't bother to get a more exact time because that's something that only really rarely happens. The heat in that indexing process never became excessive. I used a monitor program that shows me sensors, and it showed me all along the way that the heat was hovering somewhere around 140, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. The bottom of the computer, perhaps right in the very center, I can actually show it to you. The bottom of the computer, right in the very center, got a little warm, but nothing compared to my MacBook Pro. The other thing is that I checked Activity Monitor to see what was happening with the processor. The processor never jumped above about 96%. So where my MacBook Pro can I don't know how it does it, but it can dedicate 200 or 300% of a processor. The MacBook Air doesn't do that. It's maintaining the heat and what it needs to do by governing the process. The total indexing time was about the same between the two computers, but the MacBook Air took much longer in the last 1 or 2%. On my MacBook Pro, it chugs along and then it'll hit about the 96, 97% mark, and then the fans will come on and it gets really warm. That never happened. Obviously, there's no fans, but because there's no fans, it's going to throttle when things want to get a little bit warm. The other thing is, just for the sake of full disclosure, I was running the beta version of Logos on my MacBook, and so I completely reinstalled Logos to get to the release version, which meant a complete second download and reindexing overnight. So that's the Logos part. For Proclaim, I'm going to do a little bit less invasive. I'm going to duplicate last Sunday's presentation and change some of the elements for this upcoming week. I'll update the psalm reading, I'll import some new songs and make any edits that are necessary there, and then I'll delete my own sermon, my old sermon slides. There really doesn't seem to be much in Proclaim that is time extensive. So I don't think that it's necessary to time all of that. You'll get an idea of the responsiveness of the machine. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll begin by launching Logos on the MacBook Pro 16. As you can see, it's going to take 11.21 seconds. I'm waiting for the sync to stop swirling, and there it stopped. So let's jump to the MacBook Air and get Logos launched. You're going to see it's going to take a little bit longer to get fully there. 16.33 seconds. Still not bad for Logos at all, and when it comes up, it's complete. Now on the MacBook Pro 16-inch, I want to go ahead and open up a layout. I'll open up my typical sermon prep starting point, which I call Matthew Detail. I add to it, but then I keep it pretty lean. And that opens in 6.1 seconds. Now in the MacBook Air, let's go ahead and open up the sermon prep layout that I use. And that is going to take about 8.43 seconds to open up fully. Back over to the MacBook Pro now. I'm going to go ahead and change my Bible text to Matthew 6, 9 to 10. That's what I'm preaching this coming weekend. And then move to the exegetical guide. And I want to open up 3 sections. We'll begin by opening up commentaries. And we see that takes just under 2 seconds. Not too bad. We'll close that. We'll go to word by word, which I use all the time. And I'm waiting for the black words to, or the text to be completely black so that it's paying attention to me again. And it takes 13.39 seconds to do that. And then important words, which I use as well. and that's 2.11 seconds. Not too bad on that. Okay, looking again at the MacBook Air, I'm going to go to the exegetical section and open up commentaries. That just took a second, very quick. I'm going to open up word by word and wait for those black words to populate in, and we're going to see that that takes 10.33 seconds, and I can close that and then open up important words, and that takes 1.54 seconds. So now in the MacBook Pro, I want to just scroll a little bit and see what the responsiveness is. This is what we deal with. It's what I deal with all the time. It's pretty smooth. It's a little bit draggy at times. It's a little bit jumpy at times. I do have it linked. It's not currently linked to anything on the in the window. But I'll go ahead and remove that link, and it's still kind of just jumpy. It's not bad. I'm used to it. It's just what we deal with Logos. I'll put that back because I do use that. Let's look at the MacBook Air and scrolling. Scrolling I found to be pretty smooth, pretty clear. It's certainly no jumpier than the MacBook Pro is. I did notice that on my notes that if I really kind of pushed it, it had a little trouble keeping up. It would take a little bit of a second to fill in the text. Same thing going back above. That's different than the MacBook Pro. Now I want to go ahead and do a search on the MacBook Pro 16-inch. Searching is huge, of course, in Logos. I'm just going to do a simple search. I'm going to look for every place that God speaks in Scripture according to the code that's there. And what I like about Logos is that it immediately begins bringing back results. It's continuing to think, you can see that, but at least I can begin sorting through the responses that I get. And if it's not coming up the right way, I can actually cancel that, of course. You don't have to wait for it to finish. But this is, it's a simple search, but it brings back many thousands of responses, and so it takes a fair amount of time, which works out to be about 30.11 seconds for that. Looking back again at the MacBook Air, it's time to do the search. I'm going to search again for every place where God is the speaker in the Bible. That's open curly quote, speaker, open angle quote, person, God, close angle quote, close curly quote, and enter. And again, this is it's just a time-consuming process. And one of the things I would love to see somebody else do is to do kind of an extended tutorial on how to create more complex searches. Graham and others have helped me with those. Anyway, this search took 27.26 seconds, which is actually a little faster than the MacBook Pro. Back at the MacBook Pro, I want to create a new sermon document. I don't care what the title is. What I want to do is add a Bible verse and wait for that to populate, and then change the background on it. So I'll begin the timing when I enter in the verse. Use John 3:16. There it's populated. I'll edit that slide. I'm going to wait for all the information to come in fully, and then choose Find Media, choose the very first one that I find, wait for Logos to finish, and then click Update Sermon, and that's 24.42 seconds. Okay, so looking back to the MacBook Air, I'm going to create a sermon document, a blank sermon document. I don't care about the title, and I'm not interested in the heading, and I just move it to the middle there. What I want to know is how long does it take to create a Bible slide and edit the background and have all of that complete. And so that's what I'm doing here. I can close up the info window there. And then I'll go ahead and edit. and wait for it to come in. I'll choose Find Media and pick the very first one it offers me. And as soon as it's done, I'll go ahead and click on Update Sermon, and you're going to see that that took about 28 seconds. I did fool around closing that window, and so I subtracted a second for that. So back to the MacBook Pro, I'm going to open up the library full screen and tag a large number of resources. So I'll select all of my commentaries, 2,235 commentaries, which seems like a lot, but it's really not. Anybody who collects resources will tell you. I'm going to give them all the same tag, personal tag, my tag, because I use tagging to create collections and to create subgroupings to make my own research more efficient. I can't possibly read the 80 or 100 or 200 commentaries I have on certain books. I can't read them in a week. And so I create preferred groups and then kind of secondary and even kind of tertiary groups based on time. And what we see is that in the end, this takes 30.29 seconds for the MacBook Pro to finish that tagging process. And the final test on the MacBook Air is opening up the library, selecting all of my commentaries, 2,235 of them, and selecting them all there and giving them all the same tag so that I can see how long this takes. Being able and what I'm waiting for, of course, is for that yellow bar to go away. Now, what's interesting to me is it accomplished this task in 20 seconds. The MacBook Pro was 30. Now, you'll notice that the sync is still going. I'm getting ready to quit, so it doesn't matter if it syncs now or if it syncs when I quit. It is going to take some time. And for the record, I've got gigabit internet. I generally run about 700 or 800 megabits, so that's nice and quick. I'll go ahead and quit Logos, back to the Finder. That's it for Logos then on the MacBook Pro. I'll open up Proclaim, which seems like is never a speed demon as it gets opening up. Ultimately, it takes 18.45 seconds to open Proclaim completely. I'm going to duplicate last week's presentation in preparation for this coming week. So I'll do that, and I'll change the name of the presentation. And then I want to update Psalm 22 to Psalm 23 for this coming week. Want to, let's close that. I want to get rid of the songs that we sang and then import the songs for this coming week. We use Planning Center. I like Planning Center, and so I'd go up and import from Planning Center and choose One Hope Fellowship. I pastor two churches, Community of Believers and One Hope Fellowship. And click Import. There they are. I often have to check how the text flows to make sure there's enough room and things like that. And I see that the chorus here is misnamed, and it's misnamed there as well. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and change the chorus. If you don't use Proclaim, the red means that I've asked it to display something in the sequence that it doesn't recognize. So now it matches. We're all good there. And then I would want to go ahead and delete last week's sermon slides. And that's good. I'm happy with that. And then I'll go ahead and quit Proclaim. Let's go ahead and take a look at the MacBook Air and Proclaim. Proclaim is just no speed demon, as I mentioned before, but I was actually kind of surprised and pleased that it opened up pretty much as fast as it did on the MacBook Pro. So the same operations. I'm going to duplicate last Sunday's presentation, and I'll change the title over for this coming Sunday. I'll update Psalm 22 to Psalm 23 for our Bible reading. And once that's done, I'll remove the songs that we did this past Sunday. And then go to Add Item and Import and bring songs in from Planning Center for Sunday. And I'll go ahead and check those two places I already know about to get everything happy there. And then finally I'll move down and delete my previous sermon slides and get ready for the new ones. And then go ahead and quit Proclaim. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results, then the final results. Just to highlight the winners here, the MacBook Pro won in the launch and the opening, the layout, and editing a Bible slide. The MacBook Air M1 won with opening the commentary section and the word-by-word section. It won in the search. It won in the retagging a lot of resources, and I think that's fairly significant. A third faster is meaningful. In the end, it took the MacBook Pro 2 minutes and 16 seconds to conduct these operations. It took the Air 2 minutes and 12 seconds to conduct these operations. So what's interesting to me is that back in May, April or May, I spent $4,100 on the MacBook Pro. And I spent $1,249 on the MacBook Air. If back in May the MacBook Air M1 had been available, I wouldn't have bought the Pro. I already had a MacBook Pro 15-inch, and it kind of did what I needed to do. It was 3 years old. I try and update so I can keep things as smooth as I can, and additional storage on it. What's really meaningful about these numbers is that it makes these two machines roughly equivalent. Now, there are things that the MacBook Pro is going to do in a better way. I think it would handle video editing and video processing in a better way, just because it has fans and it can go ahead and run faster and cool itself with the fans. I think that's what held the Air back in indexing, was the fact that there's no fans, and so where the MacBook Pro will run up into 200 or 300% of the processor during indexing, the Air never got above 96%. But in terms of day-to-day work, they're equivalent machines. So there's such an irony that Apple has the reputation of being the really expensive machine and not worth it. If that's ever been true in the past, I'm not convinced it has been. If that's ever been true in the past, it's not true now. It's not true now. Their entry-level plus one laptop is one of the fastest laptops in the world. I can't wait to see in the next 6 months or year what they do with the MacBook Pro M1. That's going to be stunning. I don't think I'd be able to swing picking one of those up right away. I'll just have to deal with my coveting. So that's the results to this. I do want to say one more thing. As I bring everything to an end, Logos is a very complex program. It takes a long time to learn. It takes a long time to really use efficiently. And I wouldn't be able to do that as well as I'm able to if it weren't for two resources. The first is Morris Proctor's Logos boot camps. A couple of years after I started using Logos, I attended a 2-day boot camp that Morris did. And it made a huge difference in how I was able to streamline and customize and really get down to what I wanted to do. And it made it significantly faster to work with as well. But what's been more important to me over these years of using Logos has been the forums and the people in the forums. I'm thinking about people like Graham Criddle and MJ Smith, who just hit 30,000 posts. That's remarkable. Dave Hooten, Falana, and many others. People with logos sometimes, but quite often just users who are actually kind of down in the trenches using the software. You've made my ministry more effective. You've responded to my questions with kindness and with humor, and you've tried to ask additional questions to figure out what it is I'm actually trying to do at times. And I appreciate that incredibly. I have tremendous gratitude for all of you. I believe that the Logos forums are a feature of Logos Bible software that people generally don't talk about, that Logos doesn't advertise, but I think it's probably one of the strongest features that they have. And I'm glad to be a part of this community. It's been a joy to do this. I hope that it's helpful. And may God bless you, and let's continue on in the study of His precious Word.